The story of World War II in the Pacific is often told through grand strategies, epic naval battles, and the decisions of famous generals. But sometimes, the course of history is altered by individuals whose names are known only to a few people who, through sheer ingenuity and a refusal to accept the word impossible, changed everything. This is the story of one such man, a mechanic from Arkansas whose unorthodox genius would turn the tide of the air war against Japan. His name was Paul Gunn, but to the thousands of airmen who would come to owe their lives to him, it was simply Papi. Our story begins not on the battlefield, but in the quiet, rural landscape of Sebastian County, Arkansas, at the turn of the 20th century. Born in 1899, Paul Irvin Gunn grew up far from the world of aviation and warfare. He was a farm boy, and from a young age, he was surrounded by machinery. While other kids were playing games, young Paul was fascinated by the inner workings of tractors, pumps, and anything with a motor. He had a natural, almost supernatural, feel for engines. He wasn't just interested in how they worked. He felt an innate connection to them, able to diagnose a problem by sound, by feel, by instinct alone. This wasn't something he learned from a book. It was a gift. This gift led him to leave the farm. Seeking a bigger world and more complex machines, Gunn joined the U.S. Navy in 1917, just as America entered the First World War. It was here that he truly honed his skills. As a Navy machinist, he was tasked with keeping the complex and often temperamental engines of warships running. He quickly earned a reputation as a wizard with a wrench. When other mechanics gave up, declaring an engine a lost cause, Gunn would step in. With a calm confidence that bordered on arrogance, he would tinker, improvise, and somehow, miraculously, bring the dead machinery back to life. He never saw a machine as broken, just temporarily misunderstood. His superiors were baffled by his methods. He rarely followed the manual, but they couldn't argue with the results. After a decade in the Navy, Gunn's love for engines took him to the skies. He learned to fly, earning his pilot's license and eventually leaving the military for the burgeoning world of commercial aviation. The Roaring '20s were giving way to the Great Depression, but the skies offered a new frontier. Gunn found his way to the Philippines, a U.S. territory at the time, and a hub of opportunity in the Far East. He started working as a pilot and mechanic for Philippine Airlines, which was in its infancy. Here, in the tropical heat and remote jungle airstrips, his talent for improvisation became a matter of survival. Flying in the Philippines in the 1930s was a world away from the orderly aviation industry of today. Spare parts were scarce, sometimes non-existent. A flight might take you to a remote island with nothing more than a dirt strip for a runway. If your engine failed, there was no well-stocked hangar or a team of specialists to call. There was just you, your toolbox, and your wits. This environment was Papi Gunn's natural habitat. He became a legend among the local pilots. Stories circulated about him fixing a cracked engine block with chewing gum and baling wire, or fashioning a critical part from a tin can. He wasn't just a pilot who could fix planes. He was a master mechanic who could fly them. He established his own small airline, buying old, retired planes that others considered junk. He saw potential where others saw scrap. He would lovingly restore these aircraft, often modifying them with his own custom designs to better handle the harsh tropical conditions and heavy cargo loads. He developed an unshakable confidence in his own work. He believed any machine could be made to do anything, as long as you were clever enough to figure out how. He pushed his planes, and himself, to the absolute limit, flying treacherous routes through mountain passes and unpredictable weather that other pilots wouldn't dare attempt. By the late 1930s, Papi Gunn was a middle-aged family man, a successful, if somewhat eccentric, civilian entrepreneur living a comfortable life in Manila. He had a wife, Polly, and 4 children. He was known as a tough, no-nonsense boss, but also a deeply loyal friend. He had a booming voice, a commanding presence, and an absolute certainty in his own abilities that could be mistaken for stubbornness. He had built a life for himself from scratch, powered by grease, gasoline, and sheer force of will. The looming threat of war in Europe and Asia seemed a distant concern, but the world was changing. The Empire of Japan was expanding its influence across the Pacific, and the Philippines, with its strategic location and American presence, was squarely in its sights. As tensions mounted in 1941, the U.S. military began a rapid buildup of its forces in the islands. The small, pre-war airfields were suddenly bustling with the most advanced American fighter planes and bombers. To men like Papillon, who knew the local terrain and weather better than anyone, the impending conflict was becoming impossible to ignore. His unique skills, forged in the peaceful but challenging world of civilian aviation, were about to be tested in the crucible of war. He didn't know it yet, but this mechanic from Arkansas, this jungle pilot, this master of making things work, was about to become one of the most important secret weapons in the Allied arsenal. The unorthodox mind that could coax life back into a dead engine was about to be unleashed on the war in the Pacific, and nothing would ever be the same again. By 1942, Hitler's grip on Europe seemed unbreakable. From the icy shores of Norway to the sun-drenched coast of southern France, a new order had been established. But across the English Channel, the Allies were gathering strength, and Hitler knew it. An invasion was not a matter of if, but when. His solution was monumental, a project of staggering scale. The Atlantic Wall. This was to be Fortress Europe, an impenetrable barrier of concrete and steel stretching over 3,000 miles. Hitler envisioned a continuous line of fortifications, bristling with guns, packed with soldiers, and seeded with millions of mines. He declared that this wall would hold back any invasion, throwing the Allies back into the sea. Construction began in earnest. The Todd organization, the Third Reich's civil and military engineering group, was put in charge. They mobilized a massive workforce, including conscripted laborers from across occupied Europe, to build thousands of bunkers, casemates, and observation posts. Giant coastal batteries were installed, their guns capable of hurling enormous shells miles out to sea. These weren't just simple pillars, they were complex, self-contained fortresses, designed to withstand naval bombardment and aerial attack. The scale was immense, consuming vast quantities of concrete and steel, resources that were becoming increasingly scarce for the German war machine fighting on the Eastern Front. But where would the Allies strike? That was the million-dollar question, and for the German High Command, the answer seemed obvious. The Pas de Calais. Look at a map, and you'll see why. It's the shortest distance across the English Channel, just over 20 miles separating Dover from Calais. This short hop meant Allied fighter planes could provide air cover for the entire crossing. The powerful port of Calais, along with nearby Boulogne, could be quickly captured and used to land the endless stream of supplies and reinforcements needed for a sustained campaign. Logistically, it was the only choice that made sense. Any other location would mean a longer, more perilous sea journey, stretching air cover to its limits and making the supply chain a nightmare. Convinced of this logic, the Germans concentrated the bulk of their defensive efforts on the Pas de Calais. The 5th 10th Army, one of their strongest formations in the West, was stationed there. The coastline was transformed into a death trap. Heavy gun emplacements were dug in, their barrels pointing out towards the channel, ready to duel with Allied warships. The beaches were littered with a terrifying array of obstacles. There were hedgehogs, 3 steel beams welded together to rip the bottom out of landing craft. There were Rommel's asparagus, angled wooden poles topped with mines, designed to impale gliders or landing craft at high tide. And of course, there were minefields, millions of them, sown on the beaches and in the shallow waters offshore. The Germans were confident. Let them come, they thought. Calais will be their graveyard. This focus on Calais created a powerful, but ultimately misguided, defensive strategy. The Atlantic Wall was less of a continuous wall and more of a series of strong points, with the strongest of all being at Calais. Other sectors of the long coastline were more thinly defended. It was a fortress, but a fortress facing what the Germans believed was the only possible direction of attack. This created a dangerous vulnerability, a blind spot that the Allies would later exploit with breathtaking audacity. The Germans were so sure they knew the answer that they stopped asking the right questions. What if the Allies didn't choose the most logical path? What if they chose the most unexpected? In late 1943, a new commander arrived in France to inspect the Atlantic Wall, and he was not impressed. This was Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox. Fresh from the North African campaign, Rommel understood amphibious warfare from the receiving end. He had seen firsthand the devastating power of Allied air and naval supremacy. When he toured the coastal defenses, his expert eye saw not an impenetrable fortress, but a fragile facade. He was horrified by the gaps, the incomplete state of many fortifications, and the passive defensive mindset of the troops. The wall, he believed, was a dangerous illusion. Rommel's philosophy was simple and brutal. The invasion had to be defeated on the beaches. He knew that if the Allies managed to establish even a small foothold, it would be over. "The war will be won or lost on the beaches," he famously told his aide. "The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. For the Allies, as well as for Germany, it will be the longest day." He argued that once the Allies were ashore, their overwhelming air power would prevent the Germans from moving reinforcements to counter the beachhead. The battle had to be won in the water and at the tide line. There would be no second chance. Immediately, Rommel threw himself into the work of strengthening the defenses, especially in the areas he felt were neglected. He drove his men relentlessly, ordering the accelerated laying of millions more mines, both on land and at sea. He pushed for the flooding of low-lying areas behind the beaches to hamper the movement of paratroopers and glider-borne infantry. He demanded more concrete, more guns, more troops. Rommel's frantic energy and chilling premonitions stood in stark contrast to the complacency of many in the German high command. They were still fixated on Calais, convinced of their own strategic brilliance. Rommel, however, was haunted by a different possibility. He looked at the long, sandy beaches of Normandy and saw an alternative. Yes, the crossing was longer, and the lack of a major port was a huge disadvantage, but for that very reason, it was less defended. It was the unexpected choice. Rommel feared that the Allies might be willing to pay the high price of a riskier landing in Normandy in exchange for the element of surprise. The year is 1943. The tide of war is turning, but the cost is staggering. In the east, the Soviet Union bears the brunt of the fighting, pleading for a second front. In the west, Allied leaders Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin know that to defeat Nazi Germany, they must launch a massive cross-continental invasion of France. But where and how? This is the story of Operation Bodyguard, the most elaborate and audacious deception in military history. A plan designed to fool Hitler himself and ensure the success of DAD. The challenge was monumental. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. The entire coast of occupied Europe, from Norway to the Spanish border, was bristling with defenses known as the Atlantic Wall. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was in charge of fortifying it. He knew the Allies had to cross the English Channel, the narrowest point of which was the Pas de Calais, just 21 miles from Dover. It offered the shortest sea route and the quickest path to Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley. For the German High Command, Calais was the obvious target. The Allies knew this, and they decided to use this assumption to their advantage. The goal wasn't just to land troops in France. It was to keep them there. A successful landing could easily turn into a catastrophic failure if the Germans could quickly concentrate their elite panzer divisions and push the invaders back into the sea. The Allies had to make the Germans believe the main invasion would happen somewhere else, specifically at the Pas de Calais. This would convince them to keep their strongest forces positioned there, far away from the real landing site, the beaches of Normandy. The problem was, Normandy was a less logical choice. It was further from England, the beaches were less ideal, and the nearby port of Cherbourg was heavily defended. To make the Germans ignore Normandy and fixate on Calais, the Allies needed a lie. Not just a small lie, but a big lie. A lie so colossal, so detailed, and so convincing that it would become an undeniable truth in the minds of the German leadership. This idea gave birth to Operation Bodyguard, named after a remark by Winston Churchill. In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. This wasn't a single plan, but a grand symphony of deception, a master strategy that would coordinate dozens of smaller operations across Europe. Its sole purpose was to mislead the enemy about the timing, scale, and, most importantly, the location of the Allied invasion. The planning began in earnest after the Tehran Conference in late 1943. A special team was assembled in London, known as the London Controlling Section. These weren't just military men. They were a motley crew of academics, lawyers, and even a former magician. Their job was to craft the narrative of the lie. They had to create a completely fictional version of the Allied invasion plan and then leak it to the Germans through a vast network of double agents, fake radio traffic, and diplomatic channels. The Corps of Bodyguard was the creation of a phantom army. This army needed a name, a commander, and a base of operations. It would be called the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. And who better to command this ghost army than the one general the Germans feared most, George S. Patton. Patton was a brilliant but controversial commander, temporarily sidelined after a slapping incident in Sicily. The Allies turned this PR disaster into a strategic. They gave Patton command of FUSAG, knowing German intelligence would be watching his every move. His appointment would signal to the Germans that FUSAG was the primary invasion force. The stage for this grand illusion was set in Kent, directly across the channel from Calais. This is where the Allies would build their phantom army. The plan was to create the illusion of a massive military buildup. They would construct fake barracks, fake fuel depots, and fake landing craft. They would fill the airwaves with fake radio chatter, simulating the communications of an army preparing for battle. Every detail had to be perfect, because German reconnaissance planes would be flying overhead, their cameras capturing the evidence of the impending Calais invasion. But Bodyguard was more than just inflatable tanks. It was a multi-layered deception. Once a plan, Operation Fortitude North, aimed to convince the Germans that the Allies were also planning an invasion of Norway. This would tie down hundreds of thousands of German troops there, preventing them from being moved to France when the real invasion began. Another plan, Operation Zeppelin, targeted the Balkans, suggesting a possible Allied landing in Greece or Yugoslavia to keep German divisions occupied in the Mediterranean. The logic was simple but profound. If you tell a lie that your enemy already wants to believe, they will find the evidence to support it. The German High Command was convinced Calais was the logical target. Operation Bodyguard was designed to feed that conviction, to nurture heat, and to make it an unshakable belief. They were creating a false reality. A world where the phantom FUSAG was real and the massive force gathering for Normandy was merely a diversion. The planners of Bodyguard were playing a high-stakes psychological game. They weren't just moving pieces on a map. They were manipulating the minds of their enemies. They studied the personalities of German commanders, their biases, their fears, and even Hitler's own intuition-driven decisions. The entire operation was a calculated gamble, betting that a carefully constructed fiction could be more powerful than the truth. As 1943 drew to a close, the pieces were being put into place. The agents were being briefed. The artists and engineers were designing the props for their phantom army, and the radio operators were preparing their scripts. The success of the largest amphibious invasion in history now rested not just on soldiers and ships, but on the shoulders of these deceivers, the architects of the big lie. The fate of the war depended on their ability to make the Germans look one way, while the real blow came from another. The bodyguard of lies was assembling, ready to protect the precious truth of deep. In the high-stakes game of World War II, deception wasn't just a tactic, it was an art form. By 1943, the Allies were planning the largest amphibious invasion in history. But to succeed, they needed to convince the Germans that the main attack was coming somewhere else, specifically at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. The problem was, how do you make an enemy believe in an invasion force that doesn't actually exist? The answer was Operation Fortitude, and its centerpiece was one of the greatest military hoaxes ever conceived. The First United States Army Group, or FUSAG. This was the challenge facing Allied intelligence. They had to create an army out of thin air. An army so convincing that the German High Command would divert its most powerful divisions to counter it, leaving the real landing beaches in Normandy vulnerable. The first step wasn't building tanks or landing craft. It was creating a paper trail. Allied planners began by generating a mountain of paperwork. Fictional unit designations, troop rosters, supply requisitions, and battle plans were meticulously crafted. These documents were designed to be intercepted by German intelligence, painting a picture of a massive army gathering in southeastern England, poised to strike at Calais. This ghost army needed a headquarters, And so a real headquarters was established for FUSAG, complete with staff officers and administrative personnel. Their job was to create the illusion of command and control. They generated a constant stream of radio traffic, sending coded messages that they knew German listening posts would pick up. These messages discussed troop movements that never happened, supply shipments that didn't exist, and invasion plans that were pure fantasy. It was a symphony of deception, broadcast across the airwaves for an audience of one, the German intelligence network. But an army isn't just radio chatter and paperwork. It needs a leader, a powerful, famous, and feared leader whose presence would lend undeniable credibility to the hoax. The Allies had the perfect man for the job, General George S. Patton. After the infamous slapping incident in Sicily, Patton was sidelined, a brilliant but controversial commander without an army. This was a golden opportunity. The Allies knew that the Germans respected and, more importantly, feared Patton. They considered him the Allies' best general. So, who better to command their largest, most powerful, fictitious army group? Patton's appointment was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. He was deliberately made very visible in southeastern England. He was seen reviewing troops, giving fiery speeches, and visiting command posts. Photographers captured his every move. Of course, the troops he was reviewing were often part of the deception, and the command posts were elaborate fakes. But to German spies and reconnaissance planes, the message was clear. Patton is in Kent, and he's commanding a massive army. Therefore, the main invasion must be aimed at Calais. With the paperwork in place and a celebrity general at the helm, it was time to give the Ghost Army a physical form. This is where the real magic began. The Allies enlisted a team of artists, designers, and engineers from the British film industry and the Royal Engineers. Their mission was to create a visual spectacle of a massive military buildup. They began constructing hundreds of inflatable rubber tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces. From the air, these decoys were indistinguishable from the real thing. They were lightweight, easy to deploy, and could be moved around at night to simulate the movement of vast armored divisions. An entire dummy infrastructure was built to support this phantom force. Fake airfields were constructed with wooden and canvas airplanes parked on the runways. Empty oil storage tanks were assembled near phony pipelines. They even built fake landing craft out of wooden canvas, staging them in the harbors of southeastern England. The level of detail was incredible. They even created fake tire tracks in the dirt roads, using special rollers to simulate the passage of heavy vehicles. From the air, it looked like a million-man army was preparing to embark. To complete the illusion, the Allies employed sonic deception. Giant speakers were hidden in the countryside, blasting the sounds of troop movements, tank engines, and construction work, day and night. The noise created the auditory impression of a bustling military machine, reinforcing the visual evidence gathered by German reconnaissance. Double agents, controlled by the British under the double-cross system, played a crucial role. These trusted German spies fed their handlers a steady stream of fabricated intelligence, confirming the existence and strength of FUSAG. They reported on Patton's movements, the location of his divisions, and the supposed invasion timeline, all of which was carefully scripted by Allied intelligence. The combined effect of this multi-layered deception was staggering. The Germans completely bought it. Hitler and his generals became obsessed with FUSAG. They were convinced that the main Allied thrust would come at the Pas de Calais, led by the formidable Patton. Even after the D-Day landings began in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the Germans held back their powerful 15th Army in the Calais region for weeks. They believed Normandy was just a diversion, a feint designed to draw their reserves away from the real invasion site. This crucial delay gave the Allies the time they needed to establish a secure beachhead in Normandy and pour in reinforcements. The Ghost Army, an army that existed only on paper, in radio waves, and as rubber and canvas props, had successfully pinned down hundreds of thousands of elite German troops at the most critical moment of the war. It was perhaps the single most effective deception campaign in military history, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon of war isn't a bomb or a bullet, but a brilliantly told lie. The story of FUSAG is a testament to the ingenuity and audacity of the men and women who created an army that didn't exist, and in doing so, changed the course of World War II. Picture this. Spring 1944. The air in southeastern England is thick with anticipation. D-Day's on the horizon, but the Allies have a colossal problem. How do you assemble the largest invasion force in history without tipping off the enemy? The answer wasn't just in amassing real soldiers and steel, but in creating a phantom menace, a ghost army so convincing it would fool Hitler himself. This is the story of Operation Fortitude, a masterpiece of illusion where victory depended on what the Germans thought they saw. This grand deception was orchestrated by the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. On paper, FUSAG was a million-strong behemoth, commanded by the legendary General George S. Patton, the one commander the Germans feared most. Its mission, to invade the Pas de Calais, the shortest and most logical crossing point to France. There was just one tiny detail. FUSAG didn't actually exist. It was a phantom, conjured from thin air. Rubber and sheer audacity. And the wizards behind this illusion were a motley crew of artists, designers, and engineers, known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, or more famously, the Ghost Army. Their job was to create the illusion of a massive military buildup, and their tools were anything but conventional. Instead of real tanks, they had inflatable rubber Shermans. These weren't flimsy pool toys. They were meticulously crafted decoys that, from a Luftwaffe spy plane's perspective, looked just like the real thing. A small team of engineers could build an entire armored division in a matter of hours. They'd arrive at an empty field, unpack the deflated tanks, and with the hiss of air compressors, a formidable force would materialize out of nowhere. To add to the realism, they'd even use a real bulldozer to create fake tank tracks in the dirt, giving the impression of heavy machinery constantly on the move. But a stationary army is a dead army. To make the illusion breathe, they had to simulate movement. The Ghost Army would create fake motor pools, then drive a handful of real trucks in loops, kicking up dust and creating the visual signature of a vast convoy. They'd have soldiers hang laundry on clotheslines, stage mock drills, and even set up fake field kitchens. It was theater on an epic scale, with every detail designed to be caught by German reconnaissance. The goal was to paint a picture of an army bursting at the seams, ready to strike at Calais. The deception didn't stop on the ground. The Ghost Army built entire airfields from scratch, or rather, from plywood and canvas. They constructed fleets of fake P-51 Mustangs and B-17 bombers, perfectly parked to look like they were being prepped for missions. These wooden airfields would suddenly appear overnight near the coast, complete with fake runways, hangars, and fuel dumps. 2. German aerial photography. These looked like forward operating bases, reinforcing the idea that the main invasion force was staged directly opposite Calais. The level of detail was incredible. They knew German reconnaissance flew at high altitudes and certain times of day, so they designed the decoys to cast the right shadows and have the correct silhouette from 30,000 feet. Of course, a modern army makes a lot of noise, and this is where the sonic deception unit came in. These audio wizards, recruited from top sound engineering firms, had a library of pre-recorded sounds. They had recordings of armored divisions on the move, infantry units digging in, and even the casual chatter of soldiers in camp. Using powerful, custom-built speakers mounted on trucks, they could project these sounds for miles. Imagine being a German listening post across the channel, hearing the unmistakable rumble of hundreds of tanks maneuvering in the dead of night. It was terrifyingly convincing. They could make a lonely field sound like the staging ground for 10,000 men. The radio waves were just as crucial. A massive army group like FUSAG would generate an immense amount of radio traffic. So, the signal companies of the Ghost Army created a blizzard of fake transmissions. They mimicked the specific fist or typing style of different radio operators, sent out coded but ultimately meaningless messages, and even broadcast phony reports about Patton inspecting his troops. German intelligence intercepted this chatter, meticulously analyzing it, and concluding that FUSAG was not only real, but was in a high state of readiness. They were feeding the Germans exactly what they were conditioned to look for, and the enemy swallowed it whole, while the Ghost Army was building its phantom force in the southeast. The real Allied armies were gathering in secret in the southwest of England, under a strict radio silence and media blackout. The contrast was deliberate. All eyes, All ears, all German intelligence resources were focused on Patton's Ghost Army in Kent and Essex, precisely where the Allies wanted them. The deception was so effective that even after the real D-Day landings began in Normandy on June 6th, the German High Command remained convinced it was just a feint. They held back their most powerful panzer divisions, waiting for Patton's real invasion at Pas de Calais, an invasion that would never come. This delay was critical. It gave the real Allied forces the precious time they needed to establish a secure beachhead in Normandy and begin their push inland. The rubber tanks, the wooden planes, and the symphony of fake sounds had done their job. The Ghost Army, a unit of just over 1,000 men, had successfully held a significant portion of the German army in place, saving countless lives and playing a pivotal role in the success of D-Day. Their weapons were creativity, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of psychology. They proved that in war, sometimes the greatest weapon isn't a bomb, but an idea, a trick of the light, a ghost in the machine. Their story was classified for decades after the war, a silent chapter in the history of the conflict. But today, we remember the artists and engineers who painted a phantom army and fooled the world. Ever heard the saying, words are weapons? Well, in the spring of 1944, the Allies took that to a whole new level. They didn't just fight with bullets and bombs. They fought with phantom armies conjured out of thin air, all thanks to the magic of radio waves. Welcome to the story of the Ghost Army's most ingenious trick, the manufactured radio war. As the Allies geared up for the D-Day invasion, they knew they needed a massive diversion. The plan was Operation Fortitude, a grand illusion designed to convince the Germans that the main attack would land at the Pas de Calais, not Normandy. But how do you make an imaginary army look real to enemy intelligence? You can't just park a few inflatable tanks and call it a day. An army, a real one, is noisy. It communicates constantly. This is where the Signal Company Special of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops stepped in. These weren't your average radio grunts. They were masters of disguise, sonic artists whose instruments were telegraph keys and microphones. Their mission, to create the illusion of a massive, 1 million strong fighting force. The First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, supposedly poised to strike at Calais. Imagine this. You're a young Allied radio operator. Your job isn't to relay real battle plans. Instead, you sit in a truck somewhere in the English countryside, tapping out coded messages that mean absolutely nothing. But to the German eavesdroppers, these messages looked like the real deal. They were meticulously crafted to mimic the unique fist or sending style of different radio operators from real divisions. Each operator has a signature rhythm, a specific way they tap the Morse key, like a telegraphic fingerprint. The Ghost Army operators studied and replicated these styles perfectly. So, one day, they might be impersonating a signalman from the 9th Armored Division, and the next, they'd switch to sound like someone from the 59th Infantry. They'd simulate the chatter of a division headquarters, then mimic the communications of a subordinate regiment, creating a complete, believable chain of command. They'd even invent call signs, daily routines, and a whole web of encrypted traffic that two German codebreakers painted a picture of a bustling, powerful army preparing for invasion. This wasn't just random noise. It was a symphony of deception. The operators knew that different types of units had different communication patterns. An armored division, for example, would have a distinct radio signature compared to an infantry division. The Ghost Army replicated these nuances flawlessly. They'd broadcast fake weather reports, logistical requests for supplies that didn't exist, and even simulated the mundane day-to-day chatter that fills the airwaves of any large military force. Think about its fake orders for tons of ammunition, phantom requests for fuel, met-up troop movement schedules, all sent in complex codes. To make it even more convincing, they had to manage the volume and location of these signals. If FUSAG was supposedly massing in southeastern England, its radio traffic needed to originate from there. So, the signal teams were constantly on the move, setting up their transmitters in different locations to create the impression of a large, shifting military presence. They would record their transmissions onto magnetic wire recorders, then drive the recordings to another location and play them back, making it seem like a unit had moved from one spot to another. It was a logistical shell game played on an epic scale across the electromagnetic spectrum. The Germans, with their sophisticated listening posts along the French coast, picked up all of it. Their intelligence analysts pieced together this phantom radio traffic and came to the exact conclusion the Allies wanted them to. A massive army, led by the famous General George S. Patton, was ready to storm the beaches of Calais. They couldn't ignore it. The sheer volume and professionalism of the radio signals were undeniable proof. This invisible war of signals was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. While inflatable tanks and dummy landing craft provided the visual bait, it was the radio deception that gave the Ghost Army its voice, its pulse, its very soul. It created a reality that existed only in the minds of the German High Command. They were so convinced of the threat to Calais that they held back crucial panzer divisions from Normandy. Even after the D-Day landings had begun, they were waiting for the real invasion, the one they had been listening to for months. Those phantom divisions, created by a handful of creative radio operators, played a critical role in the success of D-Day. They bought precious time for the real invasion force to establish a foothold in Normandy. It has an incredible story of how creativity and technical skill could be just as powerful as brute force. The men of the Signal Company Special fought a war of whispers and echoes, a battle of invisible signals that saved countless lives and helped turn the tide of the war. Their battlefield was the airwaves, and their legacy is a testament to the power of a well-told lie. Have you ever heard of the man who won an Iron Cross from the Nazis for being a British spy? This is the unbelievable true story of Juan Pujol Garcia, Spanish chicken farmer who became one of the most successful double agents of World War II, known to the British as Agent Garbo and to the Germans as Agent Rebel. His story isn't just about deception. It is about a level of audacity that feels like it is straight out of a Hollywood movie. But this was all real, and it changed the course of the war. Our story begins in 1941. Juan Pujol was a man with a deep hatred for both fascism and communism. Stemming from his experiences in the Spanish Civil War, he decided he wanted to help the Allies, specifically Britain. So he walked into the British embassy in Madrid and offered his services as a spy. They turned him down. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. The British simply didn't trust him. They thought he was either unqualified or a potential double agent himself. But Pujol was not a man who took no for an answer. He thought, if the British won't hire me as a real spy, I'll become a German spy first and then prove my worth to the British. So, he went to the German embassy. With a manufactured air of importance and a fake pro-Nazi persona, he convinced the German intelligence service, the Ober, that he was a fanatical fascist, eager to spy for them in Britain. The Germans bought it. They gave him a crash course in espionage and visible ink. Code words, the whole package along with a bit of cash and a mission. Go to London and build a network of informants. There was just one tiny problem. Pujol had no way of getting to Britain. The British had already denied him a visa. Did that stop him? Not at all. Instead of going to London, Pujol went to Lisbon, Portugal. From there, he started creating his masterpiece of deception. He bought a blue guide to Britain, a Portuguese map, and some English-language reference books. From his small apartment in Lisbon, he began to invent his reports to the Germans. He fabricated stories about troop movements, naval deployments, and political gossip, all supposedly gathered from inside Britain. He created a completely fictional world, using details from the travel guide to add a layer of authenticity. For example, he'd report on seeing troops in a specific town he read about, or describe naval activity in a port he'd only seen on a map. To make his reports even more believable, he invented a network of subagents. This wasn't just 1 or 2 contacts. It was an entire web of 27 imaginary people. There was a KLM airline pilot, a Venezuelan student, a Welsh nationalist leading a fascist group, a Waisei Sergan, the secretary in the Ministry of Information, and even a Gibraltarian waiter in a club in Charing Cross. Each of these agents had a personality, a backstory, and a specific role. Pujol wrote detailed reports from each of their perspectives, creating a symphony of disinformation. He would even make them argue with each other in their reports, or have one agent's information corroborate another's, building a complex, interconnected, and utterly fake reality. His German handlers were thrilled. They believed every word. His reports were so detailed and seemed so plausible that the Abwehr considered him their most valuable asset in Britain. They praised his diligence and the quality of his network. They had no idea their star agent was sitting in Lisbon, making it all up based on a travel guide and his own wild imagination. He even explained away his mistakes with brilliant excuses. Once, he reported that men in Glasgow would do anything for a liter of wine, not realizing that Britain used pints, not liters, and that wine wasn't a common drink for working-class Glaswegians. When his German handler gently corrected him, Pujol had one of his imaginary agents die under suspicious circumstances, claiming the agent had provided the faulty intel and had to be silenced. The Germans were so impressed by his ruthlessness that they trusted him even more. Meanwhile, the British were intercepting these German communications. At Bletchley Park, the code breakers were reading messages from a German agent codenamed Arabelle, who was providing an astonishing amount of detailed intelligence from Britain. The British were baffled. They had no record of this agent, and his information, while detailed, was often slightly off, full of small inaccuracies about British life. It was almost as if the person writing them had never actually been to the UK. After months of this, MI5, the British Security Service, finally realized what was happening. This wasn't a German spy in Britain. This was someone outside the country, feeding the Germans a stream of brilliant, creative, and largely false information. They knew they had to find this person. In early 1942, after Pujol's repeated attempts to contact them, the British finally understood his game. They arranged to bring him to London. When he arrived, he was given the codename Garbo, after the famous actress, Greta Garbo, because his MI5 case officer considered him the best actor in the world. Now, with the full backing of MI5, Garbo's operation went into overdrive. He was no longer just inventing stories from a book. He was now part of a sophisticated deception campaign, weaving his own fictions into the larger Allied strategy. His MI5 handler, a man named Thomas Harris, worked with him side by side. Together, they expanded Garbo's imaginary network. They wrote hundreds of letters and radio messages, all sent to the Germans, who dutifully paid for each agent's salary and expenses. The British would even create fake events to back up Garbo's reports. If Garbo reported a fictional sabotage at a depot, the British might run a small article in a local paper about a minor fire at that location, adding another layer of authenticity. The Germans swallowed it all. They believed so completely in Arabelle and his network that they stopped trying to land any new agents in Britain, figuring their man on the inside had it all covered. This trust would become one of the most critical factors in the success of the D-Day landings. Garbo's role wasn't just to feed the Germans misinformation. It was to build up so much credibility that when the most important lie of the war was told, the Germans would believe it without question. For years, he and Harris meticulously crafted a narrative. They built up the idea of a massive, phantom army group, the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, stationed in southeast England, preparing to invade the Pas de Calais. This was the heart of Operation Fortitude, the grand deception plan to mislead the Germans about the true location of the Allied invasion. Garbo's 27 agents all played their part. They sent a constant stream of reports about FUSAG's movements, its famous commander General Patton, and its preparations. They created a vivid picture of an imminent invasion at Calais, the nearest point of the English Channel, which the German High Command already believed was the most logical target. So, when the real invasion began on June 6, 1944, in Normandy, Garbo's greatest performance began. On D-Day, Garbo sent a message to his German handlers, warning them that the Normandy landings were happening, but insisting it was just a diversion. The real, much larger invasion, he claimed, was still coming at Calais, led by his phantom army. The Germans, who had trusted him for years, believed him. They held back crucial panzer divisions in the Calais region, waiting for a main attack that would never come. These divisions could have turned the tide in Normandy, but they sat idle, waiting for Garbo's ghost army. Even weeks after D-Day, as the Allies secured their beachhead, Garbo continued to reinforce the lie, convincing the Germans that Normandy was the feint. For his incredible service to the German Reich, Juan Pujol Garcia was awarded the Iron Cross by Hitler himself in July 1944. 5 months later, for his incredible service to the Allied cause, he was made a member of the Order of the British Empire by King George VI. He is one of the very few people, if not the only one, to be decorated by both sides in World War II. After the war, fearing Nazi retribution, Pujol faked his death and disappeared, living a quiet life in Venezuela for decades. His story only came to light in the 1980s when he was rediscovered by a British historian. Juan Pujol Garcia's Agent Garbo was a true original. A man who, armed with little more than his imagination and a travel guide, managed to create a fictional spy ring that fooled the entire German high command and saved countless lives by ensuring the success of D-Day. His tale is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest weapons in war are not guns or bombs, but creativity, courage, and the art of the lie. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most incredible deception stories of World War II. We're in the final, nerve-wracking weeks before D-Day, May 1944. The fate of the world hangs in the balance, and at the center of it all is a single man, a double agent codenamed Garbo. His real name was Juan Pujol Garcia, and he was about to pull off his greatest performance. The Allies had a massive problem. They were about to launch the largest amphibious invasion in history, Operation Overlord, targeting the beaches of Normandy. But to succeed, they needed the Germans to believe the real attack was coming somewhere else. The target for this grand deception, the Pas de Calais. The narrowest point of the English Channel. It was the most logical place to invade, which is exactly why the Allies needed the Germans to keep their best troops stationed there, far away from Normandy. To make this deception believable, the Allies created an entirely imaginary army group, the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. They built fake airfields, deployed inflatable tanks and dummy landing craft, and even generated mountains of fake radio traffic. It was a phantom army, commanded by the one general the Germans feared most, George S. Patton. But props and radio chatter weren't enough. They needed a trusted voice on the inside, someone who could confirm to the German high command that this ghost army was real and ready to strike. That voice belonged to Garbo. From his small office in London, Garbo began his math. He was not just one agent in German eyes. He was the spy master of a vast network of 27 subagents spread across Britain. Of course, this entire network was a complete fabrication, invented by Garbo and his MI5 handlers. Each of his fictional agents had a distinct personality, a specific role, and a unique way of reporting information. There was a disgruntled Welsh nationalist, a talkative Gibraltarian waiter, even a censor in the Ministry of Information. This network was Garbo's orchestra, and he was about to conduct his magnum opus. Starting in late May, a torrent of messages began flowing from Garbo's transmitter to his German handlers in Madrid. His fictional agents were all reporting the same thing: a massive buildup of troops and equipment in southeast England, directly opposite Calais. One agent, a supposed officer in the British staff, reported on FUSAG's detailed order of battle, listing divisions and corps that existed only on paper. Another agent, a dock worker, described seeing vast quantities of supplies being loaded onto ships, all destined for an invasion of Calais. The messages were incredibly detailed. Garbo didn't just report troop movements. He painted a vivid picture. He described the shoulder patches of the phantom divisions, the types of vehicles being massed, and even the morale of the soldiers. He reported on Patton's fiery speeches to his men, all designed to reinforce the idea that FUSAG was the primary invasion force. To make it even more convincing, Garbo's reports were timed perfectly. A message about a unit moving would be sent, and a few days later, the Allies would ensure that reconnaissance photos showed evidence of a new, albeit fake, encampment in that exact area. It was a symphony of deception, with Garbo as the conductor. The German intelligence service, the Abwehr, was completely hooked. They had trusted Garbo for years. His information had always been reliable, or so they thought. MI5 had carefully managed his intelligence, mixing just enough genuine, but harmless, information with the critical pieces of disinformation. By 1944, the Germans considered Garbo their most valuable asset in Britain. They referred to him by his own cutty name, Arabelle, and they believed every word he said. In fact, their faith in him was so absolute it bordered on the fanatical. This is where the story gets truly mind-boggling. German intelligence officers in Madrid and Berlin began to value Garbo's reports more than the intelligence gathered by their own generals on the ground in France. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the man in charge of defending the French coast, had long suspected that Normandy was a likely target. He had observed Allied air attacks focusing on the region and had started to reinforce its defenses. But whenever his concerns reached the German high command, they were dismissed. Why? Because Arabelle, their star agent, was saying the opposite. Garbo's transmissions created an alternate reality for the German leadership. In their minds, the divisions massing in Kent were real. Patton was champing at the bit to lead the charge across the Channel. The reports from their own generals were seen as limited, possibly even mistaken. Garbo's network provided a comprehensive, strategic overview that seemed far more credible. It was a classic case of confirmation bias. The Germans wanted to believe the main attack was coming at Calais, and Garbo gave them every reason to. One of the most brilliant parts of the plan involved Garbo's unreliable agent, a supposed pilot who's often late or inaccurate. This agent was tasked with sending the crucial message about the Normandy landings themselves. The plan was for him to report the invasion, but for the message to be sent just a little too late to be useful. On the morning of June 6th, D-Day Garbo transmitted a message to the Germans. He said his agent had reported the invasion fleet heading for Normandy, but due to delays, the message arrived after the landings had already begun. This wasn't a failure. It was the final, genius touch. It made Garbo seem even more credible. He had reported the invasion, but a minor logistical hiccup prevented the warning from being timely. To apologize for this failure, Garbo then flooded the Germans with a tidal wave of new intelligence from his other, more reliable agents. And what did this new intelligence say? That Normandy was just a feint, a diversion designed to draw German reserves away from the real target. Calais. The Germans bought it. Completely. Even after Allied troops were fighting and dying on the beaches of Normandy, Hitler and his high command remained convinced that it was a secondary attack. The main event, the FUSAG invasion at Calais, was still to come. They held back the elite 5th 10th Army, with its powerful panzer divisions, in the Pas de Calais region, waiting for an attack that would never happen. For weeks after D-Day, they waited. They waited while the Allies consolidated their fragile beachhead in Normandy. They waited while the window to push the invaders back into the sea closed forever. Garbo continued his transmissions, describing FUSAG's final preparations. He reported on Patton's movements, on troop reviews, on the final briefings for the Phantom Assault. Every message was designed to keep German eyes fixed on Calais. And it worked. The German intelligence summaries from this period are astonishing. They consistently state that the forces in Normandy are secondary, and that the main enemy group, FUSAG, has not yet been committed. It was perhaps the greatest intelligence failure in military history, engineered by one man and his imaginary friends. The success of Garbo's deception saved countless lives. By keeping the German 5th 10th Army out of the Normandy battle, he gave the Allies the crucial time they needed to build up their forces and break out from the beachhead. Without Garbo, the Today landings could have easily been a catastrophic failure. Historians agree that the deception operation, codenamed Fortitude, was absolutely essential to the success of Overlord. And Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo, was the linchpin of the entire operation. He was an ordinary man who played an extraordinary role, a master puppeteer who pulled the strings of the entire German intelligence apparatus. His masterstroke didn't just confirm a fake army. It helped change the course of the war. June 6th, 1944. Before the sun even peeks over the horizon, the largest amphibious invasion in human history is underway. Thousands of ships clog the English Channel, a steel bridge stretching towards the coast of France. Above, an umbrella of over 11,000 aircraft roars, carrying paratroopers and dropping bombs. This is D-Day. The beaches of Normandy, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sordar, about to become legendary. Young men from America, Britain, Canada, and other allied nations are steeling themselves for the fight of their lives. For them, this is the moment the world has been waiting for. The beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. But across the Channel, in the fortified headquarters of the German High Command, the reaction is, surprisingly, calm. In fact, it's one of disbelief. As reports flood in about landings in Normandy, a fatal assumption takes hold. This can't be it. This isn't the main invasion. It's a feint, a clever trick designed to draw their best troops away from the real target. And where is that real target? All eyes are fixed north on the Pas de Calais. That's the shortest route across the Channel. That's where the mighty 15th Army, with its elite panzer divisions, is waiting. That's where Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, has built his most formidable defenses. This colossal mistake wasn't just a lucky break for the Allies. It was the result of the most sophisticated deception campaign in military history. Operation Fortitude. For months, the Allies had been feeding the Germans a steady diet of lies. They created a phantom army, the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, under the command of the famous General George S. Patton. This ghost army had inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and fake radio traffic, all centered in southeast England. Directly across from Calais, German reconnaissance planes saw exactly what the Allies wanted them to see: a massive invasion force preparing to strike at the most logical point. The deception was so complete, so convincing, that even as real soldiers were dying on the sands of Normandy, Hitler and his generals couldn't shake the belief that Patton was still waiting in the wings, ready to deliver the real knockout blow. Meanwhile, in Normandy, the reality is brutal. At Omaha Beach, American forces are pinned down by ferocious German resistance. The meticulously planned assault is on the verge of collapse. Casualties are staggering. The cliffs, laced with machine gun nests and artillery, are spitting fire and death. Every inch of sand is paid for in blood. On the other beaches, the landings are meeting with more success, but the fighting is intense everywhere. The paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines are scattered, fighting in small, isolated groups to secure crucial bridges and crossroads, sowing chaos and disrupting German communications. These men know this is the real deal. There's nothing fake about the bullets whizzing past their heads. Back in Germany, the debate rages. Some junior officers on the ground in Normandy are screaming for reinforcements, insisting this is a massive full-scale invasion. Their pleas are dismissed. The high command, mesmerized by fortitude, is paralyzed by indecision. Rommel himself is away in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday, confident that the bad weather would prevent any landing. When he's finally told, he races back to France. But by then it's too late. The crucial window to smash the invasion on the beaches is closing fast. The most powerful German units, the panzer divisions that could have driven the Allies back into the sea, are held in reserve, waiting for an attack on Calais that will never come. Hitler, the ultimate authority, holds the key. He alone can release the panzer reserves. But he's asleep when the first reports come in, and his aides are too afraid to wake him. When he finally gets the news later in the morning, his first reaction reinforces the delusion. "So, it started," he says, almost gleefully. He is utterly convinced it's the diversion he's been expecting. He orders the 15th Army at Calais to stay put. It's a catastrophic decision, arguably the one that seals the fate of the Third Reich. While the German command structure is frozen by its own faulty intelligence, the Allies are fighting, dying, and clawing their way inland. On the beaches, against all odds, the tide begins to turn. At Omaha, under the leadership of determined officers, small groups of soldiers rally. They blow holes in the German defenses, scale the bluffs, and begin to push the defenders back. On Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword, the troops are advancing, linking up with the paratroopers and consolidating their beachheads. They are battered and bruised, but they are ashore. They have a toehold in Fortress Europe. The sheer courage and sacrifice of individual soldiers are overcoming the German defenses and the disastrous miscalculations of the German High Command. For several critical days after June 6th, the Germans continue to believe that Normandy is a sideshow. They keep their best forces waiting for Patton's ghost army. This gives the Allies the precious time they need to pour more men and material onto the continent. They build up their forces, expand their beachhead, and prepare for the breakout. By the time the German leadership finally realizes their catastrophic error, it's far too late. The Allied lodgment is secure. The formidable panzers, when they are finally sent to Normandy, are thrown into the battle piecemeal and are chewed up by Allied air power and naval gunfire. The failure to identify the true invasion point on day one was not just a tactical blunder. It was a strategic disaster from which the German army in the West would never recover. The story of D-Day is not just one of Allied bravery, but also one of German delusion. It's a powerful lesson in how intelligence and deception can be as decisive as tanks and guns. The inflatable army, the fake radio chatter, the phantom general, these were the invisible weapons that kept Germany's strongest divisions idle while the fate of the war was being decided on the bloody beaches of Normandy. The success of June 6th was forged not only by the heroes who stormed the shore, but also by the masterminds who convinced the enemy to look the other way. June 6th, 1944, D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history is underway. Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy. You'd think the deception was over, right? The secret's out. But for the masterminds behind Operation Fortitude, the real show was just beginning. Their mission now, to convince the Germans that Normandy was just a diversion, a feint. The main event, they insisted, was still coming, aimed straight at the Pas de Calais. The fate of the entire invasion hung on their ability to sell this one massive, audacious lie. The hours after the first boots hit the sand were pure chaos for German high command. Reports flooded in, but they were confusing, contradictory. Was this it, the real invasion? Or a clever trick? In the midst of this uncertainty, a single, trusted voice cut through the noise. It belonged to Agent Garbo, the Germans' most prized spy in Britain, a man they believed was running a network of informants across the country. In reality, Garbo was Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish double agent working for the British. He was the star player in the Allies' elaborate theater of deception. On the morning of D-Day, Garbo sent a frantic message to his German handlers. He claimed his best agent in Dover had just reported massive troop movements, signs of an even larger invasion force preparing to cross the Channel. This wasn't just a casual tip-off. It was a carefully crafted piece of fiction, timed to perfection. The message arrived in Berlin too late to be of immediate use for the Normandy defense, a delay Garbo cleverly blamed on the chaos of the invasion. This wasn't a mistake. It was a masterstroke. By being late, Garbo's report seemed more authentic, a genuine piece of intel caught up in the fog of war. More importantly, it boosted his credibility. He had predicted the invasion, just a few hours too late. The Germans ate it up. They trusted him more than ever. With his reputation solidified, Garbo now unleashed his main attack. He began feeding the Germans a constant stream of reports from his network of entirely fictional One informant near the Scottish ports would report on troop embarkations, supposedly for Norway. Another, a supposed disgruntled officer, would leak details about the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. This was the Ghost Army, the centerpiece of the entire deception. Stationed in southeast England, FUSAG was, on paper, a massive force commanded by the one general the Germans feared most, and Patton. Of course, FUSAG didn't exist. It was an army of inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and plywood airplanes. But to the Germans, it was terrifyingly real, and Garbo was their window into its operations. He sent detailed reports on FUSAG's preparations, their unit insignias, their training exercises. He painted a picture of an army group poised and ready to strike the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. His messages were masterpieces of misdirection, filled with just enough truth to make the lies believable. He'd mention real troop divisions, but place them in the wrong locations. He'd describe Patton's fiery speeches to his men, speeches that never happened. But Garbo wasn't working alone. His fictional reports were amplified by another, equally brilliant layer of deception: radio chatter. The Allies had created an entire phantom army on the airwaves. A dedicated team of radio operators, part of the 3,103rd Signal Service Battalion, broadcasted thousands of fake messages every day. They mimicked the radio traffic of a real army group preparing for an invasion. You'd hear operators complaining about the food, gossiping about their commanding officers, requesting supplies, and coordinating movements. They developed unique fists, or Morse code sending styles, for each fictional operator to make them sound like distinct individuals. This constant stream of bogus radio traffic was a symphony of lies, conducted to convince German intelligence analysts, who were listening intently, that FUSAG was not only real, but getting ready to move. They simulated every aspect of a massive military force. One series of messages would mimic a tank regiment moving toward the coast. Another would simulate an infantry division conducting a practice landing. They even faked messages from Patton himself, using an operator who could imitate his distinct, aggressive command style. The sheer volume and detail of the traffic were overwhelming. For the German analysts, piecing together this radio intelligence, the conclusion was inescapable. A huge army under Patton was massing in Kent, preparing to invade Calais. Hitler himself was completely hooked. He was obsessed with Patton, viewing him as the Allies' best general. The idea that the Allies would launch their main invasion without him seemed absurd. So, when Garbo's reports and the phantom radio chatter all pointed to a Patton-led invasion at Calais, Hitler bought it. He became convinced that Normandy was the sideshow. As a result, he refused to release the powerful 15th Army, a massive force of nearly 20 divisions stationed in the Pas de Calais. These were fresh, elite troops, including formidable panzer divisions, that could have easily pushed the Allies back into the sea at Normandy. 4 weeks after D-Day, while Allied soldiers fought and died to expand their fragile beachhead in Normandy, the 15th Army sat and waited. They waited for an invasion that would never come. German reconnaissance planes flew over Kent and saw the fields filled with tanks and landing craft, never realizing they were looking at rubber decoys. Their commanders listened to the constant radio chatter, convinced they were monitoring the final preparations for the main assault. All the while, Garbo kept the narrative alive. He sent messages lamenting the diversionary attack in Normandy, assuring his handlers that his agents confirmed the main blow was still aimed at Calais. Think about the pressure on the Allied planners. Every day was a gamble. Would the Germans see through the ruse? Would a stray reconnaissance photo reveal the truth about the inflatable tanks? Would a sharp intelligence analyst notice a flaw in the radio traffic? But the deception held. For 3 crucial weeks, from D-Day until the end of June, Operation Fortitude continued to paralyze the German response. It kept the most powerful German units in France away from the real battle. This wasn't just a clever trick. It was a war-winning strategy. It protected the vulnerable Normandy beachhead and gave the Allies the precious time they needed to land more men and equipment, to build up their strength, and to finally break out into the French countryside. The success of Fortitude after D-Day is a testament to incredible audacity and meticulous planning. It was a battle fought not with bullets and bombs, but with whispers, lies, and radio waves. The phantom army of FUSAG, the brilliant deceptions of Agent Garbo, and the tireless work of the radio operators created a fiction so powerful it reshaped the reality of the war. They proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a tank or a plane, but a well-told story. The soldiers who fought and bled on the beaches of Normandy were the heroes of D-Day, but their victory was secured, in no small part, by the ghost army that never fought at all. It's the summer of 1944. The Allies have just landed in Normandy, kicking off the largest amphibious invasion ever seen. You'd think every available German soldier would be racing to push them back into the sea. But strangely, a massive, powerful German force, the 15th Army, is sitting completely still, hundreds of miles away. Why? Because they were waiting for an invasion that would never come. They were waiting for ghosts. This is the story of Operation Fortitude, the incredible deception plan that convinced the German High Command that the main Allied attack was aimed not at Normandy, but at the Pas de Calais, the northwest point of the English Channel. And at the heart of this German force was the mighty 15th Army. We're not talking about some second-rate garrison troops. This was 250,000 soldiers, a formidable fighting force packed with some of the Wehrmacht's best assets. They had powerful panzer divisions, heavy artillery batteries that could pound the coast, and elite, battle-hardened infantry units. This was the army specifically tasked with repelling the main invasion. They were coiled like a spring, ready to strike at a moment's notice. The problem for the Germans was that the Allies had built an entirely fictional army group, FUSAG, the First United States Army Group. supposedly commanded by the one and only General George S. Patton. The Allies created a masterpiece of smoke and mirrors. In the fields of Kent, across from Calais, they erected inflatable tanks, plywood landing craft, and rubber airplanes. They generated fake radio traffic, simulating the chatter of a massive army preparing to cross the channel. WWII, trusted by the Germans, fed a steady stream of top-secret intelligence, confirming that Normandy was just a diversion. Hitler and his top generals, especially Field Marshal von Rundstedt, completely bought it. They were utterly convinced that the real prize for the Allies was the Pas de Calais. It just made more sense to them. It was the shortest route to Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley. So, as the first reports of landings in Normandy trickled in on June 6th, the German High Command saw it as a feint, a clever trick to draw their reserves away from the real target. Their response was firm. The 15th Army must not move. It must stay put to face Patton's Phantom Legions. Imagine the scene at the 15th Army headquarters. Commanders are getting frantic reports from Normandy. The 7th Army is being hammered. Allied troops are establishing a beachhead, and every hour they dig in makes them harder to dislodge. You can almost hear the generals pleading over the phone. We have tanks. We have men. Let us go. We can crush them. But the order from on high was absolute. Hold your position. The main attack is yet to come. It will be at Calais. For weeks, this powerful army sat idle. Days turned into a week, then 2, then 3. The critical window to throw the Allies back into the sea was closing fast. In Normandy, the Allies were pouring men and material ashore, consolidating their gains, and preparing to break out. Meanwhile, just a few hours' drive away, entire panzer divisions were literally parked, their crews polishing their tanks, conducting drills, and staring out across the channel, waiting for an enemy that existed only in radio waves and unfalsified intelligence reports. This wasn't just a minor miscalculation. It was a strategic paralysis of catastrophic proportions for the Germans. The presence of the 15th Army's panzers in Normandy in mid-June could have dramatically altered the campaign. They could have launched a devastating counterattack against the still vulnerable Allied beachheads. The narrow, traffic-jammed roads behind the British and American lines would have been prime targets, but instead, they waited. The elite Panzer Lehr division was eventually released, but it was piecemeal. Too little and too late. The bulk of the 15th Army's strength remained locked in place. By the time the German leadership finally realized their colossal mistake, it was well into July. The Allies had not only secured their foothold in Normandy, but were on the verge of breaking out in Operation Cobra. The Ghost Army had done its job. It had held 250,000 of Germany's best soldiers in a state of suspended animation during the most decisive phase of the battle for France. The Ghost tanks and Phantom soldiers of Operation Fortitude had achieved a victory as significant as any real battle, without a single shot being fired. It's a stunning testament to the power of intelligence and deception in warfare. This incredible bluff arguably saved thousands of Allied lives and ensured the success of the Normandy landings. The 15th Army, with all its firepower, was neutralized by a phantom. They were left waiting for an invasion that only existed in their minds, a ghostly echo across the channel that sealed the fate of the Third Reich in the West. It remains one of the greatest deceptions in all of military history. By July 1944, the war on the Western Front had reached a fever pitch. The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6th had been a brutal, hard-won success, but the battle for France was far from over. For one man, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, this period would be one of dawning horror, a slow, agonizing realization that he and the entire German High Command had been completely and utterly fooled. Rommel had been one of the few German commanders who believed the invasion would come in Normandy. He had tirelessly worked to fortify the coastline, laying millions of mines and constructing countless obstacles. But even he couldn't escape the seductive lie that was Operation Fortitude. This massive Allied deception campaign was a masterpiece of misdirection, designed to convince the Germans that the main invasion would strike the narrowest point in the English Channel. In the weeks following D-Day, the Allies clung precariously to their beachhead. It was a critical time. If the Germans could have thrown their full weight, especially their elite panzer divisions, against the invaders, they might have pushed them back into the sea. But those divisions were held in reserve, waiting for the real invasion at Calais. The Allies fed this belief with phantom armies, fake radio traffic, inflatable tanks, and a network of double agents, all pointing to one place. Calais. For Rommel, stationed in Normandy, the evidence on the ground screamed that this was the main event. The sheer scale of the Allied landings, the ferocity of the fighting, the unending stream of men and materiel pouring onto the beaches, this was no mere diversion. He saw the reality with his own eyes. Yet, his pleas to Hitler and the High Command to release the Panzer Reserves fell on deaf ears. They were still mesmerized by the ghost army of General Patton, supposedly preparing to cross at Calais. Imagine Rommel's frustration. He's in the thick of the fight, witnessing the Allied build-up firsthand, knowing that every hour the Allies get stronger and his own chances of containing them dwindle. He's sending desperate reports back to headquarters, practically begging for reinforcements. The enemy's superiority in every field is overwhelming, he reported. The battle is being fought with unheard-of ferocity and with enormous losses on our side. But the response from on high was always the same. Wait. The main attack is yet to come. Be early hooly. The deception started to fray. The weather window for an invasion at Calais was closing. The phantom First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, under Patton, showed no real signs of embarking. Intelligence reports, initially so certain of a Calais landing, began to waver. For Rommel, the pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a terrifying picture. The radio intercepts his own signals units picked up were a cacophony of fake messages, a symphony of deception. He started to understand the breathtaking scope of the Allied plan. They hadn't just landed in Normandy. They had also paralyzed the German response with an army that didn't even exist. The final, crushing realization probably came in a series of blows. A report from a reconnaissance flight over southeast England, showing fields of empty camps and dummy landing craft. An analysis of Allied air power, which was concentrated entirely over Normandy, not Calais. The simple, undeniable fact that after a month of brutal combat, the Allies had not only secured their beachhead but were actively pushing inland, consolidating their gains, and preparing for a massive breakout. This wasn't a feint. This was it. This was the invasion. By the time Hitler finally, grudgingly, began to release the panzer divisions from the Pas de Calais in mid-July, it was far too little. Far too late. The opportunity was gone. The Allies had established a firm foothold. Their logistical machine was in full swing, and their air supremacy was absolute. The released German units had to travel across northern France under constant threat of air attack, arriving at the Normandy front, piecemeal, exhausted, and often they were fed into a meat grinder, unable to turn the tide. Rommel's growing certainty turned to despair. He knew the war in the West was lost. In a now famous report to Hitler on July 15th, he laid out the bleak situation with brutal honesty. He told his Führer that the front was on the verge of collapse. He wrote, "The troops are fighting heroically everywhere, but the unequal struggle is nearing its end. I must beg you to draw the proper conclusions from this situation without delay." The proper conclusion was, of course, to end the war. It was a message Hitler did not want to hear. Just 2 days later, on July 17th, Rommel's war came to an abrupt end. His staff car was strafed by an Allied fighter plane. He was thrown from the vehicle, suffering massive head injuries. He would never return to the front. While he lay recovering, the world he had fought for crumbled. On July 20th, the famous bomb plot to assassinate Hitler failed. In the brutal crackdown that followed, Rommel's name came up. His association with the conspirators, coupled with his pessimistic reports, sealed his fate. Faced with a show trial and the execution of his family, or suicide, he chose the latter. Rommel's realization in July 1944 is one of the great tragedies of the war, from the German perspective. He was a brilliant tactician who saw the truth, but his voice was drowned out by the echo chamber of the Nazi High Command, a group enthralled by a lie of the Allies' own making. He understood, too late, that the most decisive battle was unjust being fought with tanks and guns in the fields of Normandy, but had already been won in the shadows, with whispers, lies, and an army of ghosts. Imagine this. The fate of the entire world hangs in the balance, and victory depends not on brute force, but on a lie. A lie so colossal, so intricate, that it would fool one of the most ruthless dictators in history and change the course of World War II forever. This isn't a Hollywood script. This is the true story of Operation Fortitude, arguably the single greatest deception in the history of warfare. Let's set the scene. It's 1944. The Allies are poised to launch the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted. The goal? To liberate France and open a new front against Nazi Germany. But there's a huge problem. The Germans know an invasion is coming. They just don't know where or when. The entire French coastline is a fortress, bristling with guns, mines, and thousands of hardened troops. A direct assault on the strongest defenses would be a bloodbath, a potential disaster that could cost the Allies the war. So, how do you attack an enemy who's expecting you? You make them look in the wrong direction. This was the genius behind Operation Fortitude. It was a plan of breathtaking audacity, designed to convince the German high command that the main Allied invasion would strike not at Normandy, but at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. It was a logical choice for an invasion, and the Germans were already heavily defending it. The Allies just needed to reinforce that belief, to make the Germans double down on their mistake. To pull this off, the Allies created a phantom army, a ghost army. It was called the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. This army didn't have real soldiers, but it had everything else. In the fields of East Anglia and Kent, across from Calais, a bizarre stage was set. Crews inflated hundreds of rubber tanks and propped up plywood artillery guns. They built fake landing craft that looked real from the air and constructed entire dummy airfields with wooden planes. At night, they'd play recordings of tank movements and construction noise. BROADCAST. Over massive speakers to be picked up by German listening posts. But the real masterstroke was the human element. The Allies needed a commander for this phantom army. Someone so famous, so feared by the Germans, that his very presence would lend credibility to the deception. They chose General George S. Patton. The Germans considered Patton the Allies' best general. Where Patton went, they believed the main attack would surely follow. So, Patton was very publicly placed in command of FUSAG. He toured the fake installations, gave speeches to non-existent troops, and was deliberately photographed in the southeast of England, all for German intelligence to see. The deception didn't stop with props and the famous general. It was a multi-layered attack on the German mind. The Allies created a network of double agents, German spies who had been captured and turned by British intelligence. The most famous of these was a Spanish businessman codenamed Garbo. He was a master of invention, creating a fictional network of 27 sub-agents who fed a constant stream of convincing, but utterly false, information to his German handlers in Madrid. Garbo's reports were so trusted, so detailed, that the Germans awarded him the Iron Cross for his services to the Reich, even as he was actively working to destroy it. He fed them tidbits about FUSAG's immense size, its training exercises, and its readiness to invade the Pas de Calais. Radio traffic was another key component. FUSAG had a dedicated team creating a massive volume of fake radio signals. They mimicked the chatter of a vast army preparing for invasion, orders being passed, logistical reports, even soldiers, personal messages. All of this was designed to be intercepted by the Germans, painting a picture of a massive military force gathering in the east, poised to strike. From the air, from the ground, and through the airwaves. The message was the same. The real invasion is coming at Calais. Then came June 6th, 1944. D-Day, as thousands of Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy. The big question was, would the deception hold? Would Hitler believe this was just a diversion? The initial hours and days were critical. If the Germans immediately moved their elite panzer divisions from the Calais region down to Normandy, the beachhead could be annihilated, but they didn't. The deception worked better than anyone could have dreamed. Hitler and his generals were convinced Normandy was a feint. The main attack, they believed, was still to come at the Pas de Calais, led by Patton's mighty ghost army. Garbo, the double agent, sent a message to his German handlers on June 9th. 3 days after the landings, claiming that the Normandy operation was a diversionary maneuver designed to draw German reserves away from the real target. The Germans believed him completely. Because of this belief, they kept the powerful 5th Tenth Army, with its crucial panzer divisions, anchored in the Pas de Calais for 7 long weeks. After D-Day, this was the critical window the Allies needed. It allowed them to pour men and material onto the Normandy beaches, to consolidate their fragile foothold, and to build up enough strength to break out into the French countryside. By the time the German High Command finally realized they had been duped, it was too late. The Allied beachhead was secure, and the fate of France was sealed. The legacy of Operation Fortitude is immense. It stands as a masterclass in psychological warfare, demonstrating that battles can be won not just with bullets, but with beliefs. It saved countless lives. Military analysts estimate that if those panzer divisions had been at Normandy.It, Allied casualties would have been catastrophically higher, and the invasion itself might have failed. The success of the operation fundamentally shaped post-war intelligence agencies, highlighting the incredible power of deception, counter-espionage, and information control. It proved that a well-crafted lie, delivered with conviction and supported by a web of intricate details, could be more powerful than a division of tanks. Operation Fortitude wasn't just a clever trick. It was the deception that won the war. It's a testament to the idea that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one your enemy never sees. A ghost army that existed only in their minds. It's a story of audacity, of imagination, and of the incredible lengths people will go to for the cause of freedom. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to see covered. Until next time, stay curious.